Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Historia Politica Pública. This is the third episode of the series about veganism. In the first episode, which I did in Spanish, I talk about background about veganism, a bunch of different things. Whereas in the second, I mainly focus on the book Animal Liberation by Peter Singer, which was published in 1975 and created a huge wave of consciousness across the world about the importance of avoiding the non-human animal suffering, and also different statistics that he gives in his book, which is divided in 6 chapters. And I encourage you to read the book because it's also historically very interesting about how, since the biblical times, the Christianity has given more emphasis to the human animals rather than the non-human animals, whereas other religions like Buddhism has tried to emphasize our relation with all the sentient beings. So now I will start with the history of veganism and give some reason why I decided to become vegan. So the vegan society was founded in England in 1944, and it might be considered as the origin of the modern current of veganism. Thousands years ago, there were already people who reject to eat animal products. So let's say that in the modern Western world, we can go back to 1944, although Peter Singer mentioned how the vegetarian society was founded in 1847. But if we speak about veganism, perhaps the main point is 1944 in England. However, I will go back many thousands of years before, especially the ancient world. So we have in the 500 years before Christ, how the Greek philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras promote benevolence among all species, and he was following a vegetarian diet. This was 2,500 years ago. Pythagoras was obviously one of the most famous philosophers in the ancient Greece. Perhaps the most famous example is that of Siddharta Gautama. Everybody knows him. For those who doesn't relate with the name Siddharta Gautama, this is the person known as the Buddha and the founder of Buddhism, who at the same time as roughly as Pythagoras was discussing vegetarian diets with his followers. Obviously that was in India, in the Oriental world. It's interesting because at that time there was no communication between the different parts of the world, and however you have Pythagoras on the one side and Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, on the other. Obviously the Buddha, creator of Buddhism, Buddhism is a religion which rejects inflicting pain in any sentient, and I think I will dedicate another episode to Buddhism because I have been reading widely about that in the last month. It's a spiritual aspect that I really love about Buddhism. I do not consider myself as a religious person following Buddhism, but I think that the philosophy of Buddhism, for me, it is the most similar to my own ideals comparing with the other religions. For example, you have the case like a country like Bhutan, who follow the teaching of Buddhism, does not have slaughterhouses in the territory, which is a huge advance if we think in other countries. Thousands of years later, of the times of the Buddha and Pythagoras, around 1806 after Christ, we can hear the earliest concept of veganism that started to take shape with Dr. William Lyme and Percy Shelley. Percy Shelley is one of my favorite authors. In fact, his poems, Masks of Anarchy is my favorite poem ever. It was written in the aftermath of the massacre of Peterborough in Manchester, which was called as the Battle of the Massacre of Peterloo. It was done in 1818 or 1817, I don't remember exactly the year, but obviously because it happened like 2-3 years after Waterloo, the name Peterloo makes reference to the Battle of Waterloo, and also because it was carried in Manchester in the place of St. Peter. And Percy Shelley was basically, as he was called, and let me check the quote. Peterloo was denounced as, quote, an atheistic, anti-establishment, vegetarian anarchist who believed that a poem was a radical instrument. Okay, this is interesting, the way that he was categorized. He was vegetarian, he was an anarchist, as he shows in the poem Mask of Anarchy, in which basically the message of the poem is that if all the people in the world join together, we can create a better society, because the power at the end is based on the minority of people. And this idea is, after some decades, extrapolated by the anarchist movement, the communist movement, the socialists, and so on. So the poem is beautiful written, and also the message is very powerful. And the movie of Peterloo was released in 2018. And I have not watched it, but it seems that it's really well directed, and it is worth. I have been reading some reviews, and apparently it's really good movie. So yeah, obviously, going back to Dr. William Lamb and Percy Shelley. By the way, Percy Shelley is the husband of Mary Shelley, which is much more famous than him, probably because he wrote Frankenstein. Both they were among the first Europeans to publicly object to eggs and dairy on ethical grounds. Here is important the word Europeans, because as we know, in the Asian world, the people had stopped to eat this kind of foods many centuries ago. But in Europe, those perhaps were the first publicly to do that in the modern world. So, if we go to the to some other landmarks about the vegan history, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Vegan Society, which was founded in 1944, animal rights activist Luz Wellis proposed to celebrate the World Vegan Day in 1994. It was precisely the Vegan Society, which is a great source of statistics of information about veganism, that coined the concept vegan in 1944, when 6 non-dairy vegetarians, as vegans were called at that time. So at that time, the concept of vegan people were called non-dairy vegetarians. So basically people who, if a vegetarian can, let's say, eat eggs, milk, and other dairy products, these non-dairy vegetarians were vegan for all the effect. So when they settled the term of vegan, Donald Watson was one of the people who was at the meeting, described that vegan meant the beginning and end of vegetarian, as it contained the first 3 and last 2 letters of vegetarian. So yeah, this is a kind of metaphor, right? The beginning and the end of vegetarian. So the beginning is veg and the end is vegan. Okay, so the problem of that is that sometimes when you look for some product and you see the V or the VG, you don't know what makes reference, if it's vegetarian, if it's vegan. So yeah, but I understand why they try to make a kind of simple concept to name the new idea that they had at the time. Nowadays, the Vegan Society has defined veganism as, quote, a philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose, and by extension promote the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of humans, animals, and the environment. In dietary terms, it denotes the practice of dispensing with all products derived wholly or partly from animals. So it means, first of all, avoid the suffering of animals. How do we do that? Well, first of all, do not eat in animal products. Also, do not wear in clothes fabricated by animals. Also, we know nowadays how in the big farms, the animals are being killed in the most cruel manners. Have the chickens, the pigs, the cows, they are living miserable life. They are suffering because the science has demonstrated how the animals can suffer as much as we. We have the example of the lobster who are boiling in water. So, I mean, there is hardly a doubt nowadays that the animals are suffering. So for that, the idea of veganism needs to avoid all forms of exploitation of animals. And to end this episode, I mean, the history of veganism is richer, but I just wanted to give some hindsight, and you can explore and further kind of documentaries. You have Cowspiracy, Seaspiracy, and other really great documentaries. Also the books, there are a huge range of them, which you can read in order to enhance your knowledge about veganism. And if you are interested, also books about Buddhism, which can help you to understand this idea of being on kind of synergy with the planet, this idea of karma, nirvana, how this all is related with this idea of try to avoid suffering on other species. So yeah, the reason why I became vegan are not very original, honestly. I think those are the three more common, which are basically first of all, it's more sustainable for the environment. Second of all, it is to avoid suffering on animals, and finally, it's healthier for the collective and the individual. Okay, regarding the first, why is it more sustainable for the environment? Well, the Human League has pointed out 14 reasons why being vegan is better for the planet, such as reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing energy consumption, conserving water, protecting rainforests and lands, or stopping livestock emissions. The Human League is a very great website in which you can read all of that, and they have always this kind of news about veganism, protecting the environment, trying to reduce our impact to avoid climate change, how can we collaborate in order to reduce our carbon footprint, and try to implement some systems which are more sustainable, ecologic for the planet. Also, according to a research done by the Oxford University, if everybody in the planet follow a plant-based diet, food-related climate emissions will fall by 70%. Repeat that. According to a research done by the Oxford University, probably you all know this institution, if everybody in the planet followed a plant-based diet, food-related climate emissions will fall by 70%. 70. So yes, becoming vegan, it is arguably the most important thing to help to stop the climate change, reduce our impact in the planet, and also make an Earth more sustainable for everybody. This study-led author explained that, quote, avoiding meat and dairy is the single biggest way to reduce your impact on Earth. So this is said by the leading author of the research done by the Oxford University. This is something that we vegan people have been using for a long time, to kind of give legitimacy to our demands, but this is something that is scientifically demonstrated, which is great for our struggle, and is also something very important to take in account. I mean, if we believe in science, which I do, and many of you also, that is the quote again. Avoiding meat and dairy is the single biggest way to reduce your impact on Earth. It is indicative that animal farming provides just 18% of calories, but takes up 83% of farmland. So they are taking a lot of space to breed some animals, and the amount of calories that we receive is really illusory comparing with the amount of farmland. 18% of calories and taking up 83% of farmland. So the second reason to becoming vegan, it is a way to avoid cruelty towards animals. In Animal Liberation, the book that was published by Peter Singer in 1975, in which I spoke extensively in last episode, this is considered as one of the references to raise consciousness about the cruelty towards animals, and there are many examples about practice who provoke suffering in non-human animals, such as the factory farm. The statistics that he provides show how serious the problem is. So, for example, in the chapter, I think it's the 3 of the book, named Down on the Factory Farm, he points that, quote, over 100 million cows, pigs, and sheep are raised and slaughtered in the United States alone each year. And for poultry, the figure is a staggering 5 billion. I mean, the statistic is just insane. It's breathtaking. Over 100 million cows, pigs, and sheep are raised and slaughtered in the United States each year. And for poultry, the figure is a staggering 5 billion. Sorry for repeating this statistic, but when I was reading that, I mean, it blew my mind totally. As I mentioned in the second episode, I didn't become vegan after reading the book. I was already a settled vegan for more than a year before reading that, but this just reinforced your argument and helped to give you some statistic. One comment. The book was written in 1975. I have read the second edition. I think it was published in 1990 something or the beginning of the century. I don't remember exactly. But so my point is that was the statistic at that time. Now the situation is worse, as I mentioned in the last episode, because Peter Singer did an interview with New Statesman in 2022, speaking that now the situation is more miserable for animals because there are more animals that are being bred than in 1975. So, as he said in his utilitarian philosophy, there are more suffering inflicted to animals, non-human animals, than before. So, yeah, the situation is getting worse by the time. Furthermore, in the chapter 6, which is titled Speciesism Today, he mentioned about experimentation in animals and provides the following statement, quote, "The suffering that we inflict on non-human beings can be extreme, and the numbers involved are gigantic. More than 100 million pigs, cattle, and sheep go through the processes described in chapter 3 each year. In the United States alone, billions of chickens do the same, and at least 25 million animals are experimented upon annually." This is important because Peter Singer in the book do not speak only about those animals who are being bred for our lunch, for our food, but also those who suffer the experiments and in order to, have some kind of progress on science and how these animals are really being mistreated and so on. There are 2 episodes for that. The episode 3 is the one down on the factory farm, and the episode, I think is the 2, he speaks about the experimentation on animals. Moreover, reducing the impact on the environment and avoiding animal cruelty are related in many ways. For example, deforestation drives an estimated 135 species of plants, animals, and insects to extinction every day. This is crazy, basically. So, just with the deforestation, 135 different species of plants, animals, and insects to extinction every day. In other words, protecting the planet means protecting all the sentience, and the last statistic that I saw is again about for the Human League. The last reason why I became vegan, it is because it's healthier for the collective and the individual. Both the British Dietetic Association and the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics recognize that a vegan diet is suitable for every age and stage of life. There are myths pointing out that being vegan is less healthy than eating meat, considering that there are lobbies and big corporations making millions of dollars with the farm industry. This will not come as a surprise. However, science has linked vegan diets with lower blood pressure and cholesterol, lower risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and sometimes of cancer. So, aside from taking care of your well-being, it's important to note the impact that following a vegan diet carries for the rest of the people. Only one comment before going for that. I've been vegan for more than 1 year and a half. I have been regularly doing checks to myself. I don't have any problem with anything. B12, which is the allegedly the vitamin that we vegans need to eat more. There are many products nowadays that they have implemented B12 in them, such as the vegan cheese, the almond milk, oat milk, coconut milk. Also, there is the butter, the vegan butter, and many others more. And also, one thing that I realized about being vegan is that because you are not eating meat anymore, you tend to use more vegetables, and using more vegetables is good because they have a lot of vitamin like vitamin A, B, C, D, etc. So yeah, one thing to say is that becoming vegan doesn't mean to substitute the meat for nothing. Let's say that if before you used to eat rice with tuna, it's not a good idea to eat just rice. Instead tuna, you can use, let's say, tofu, you can use lentils, you can use like pepper, carrots, aubergine, little dozens of vegetables which combine very well with vegan diet. Veganism is true, it makes you cook more, which is great. If you like to cook, you can have many good diets online which can help you to enhance your cooking skills. And also it's good if you have some friends at home, you can cook a lot of stuff, and yeah, for sure they will be grateful to you. Just the last thing that I wanted to touch in this episode is, as the Human League points out, factory farms keep animals in filthy, crowded conditions, and this creates the perfect environment for disease and pathogens to spread. To stop the spread of these diseases, the meat industry pumps animals with antibiotics. Inevitably, this contributes to the growing threat of antibiotic resistance. So according to the United Nations, if antibiotic use continues at its current rate, the antimicrobial resistant infection may become the leading cause of death globally by 2050. So, okay, yeah, there is no positive things about eating meat, isn't it? So the last pandemic, COVID-19, one of the reasons that what happened was that because the human beings are destroying the animal landscape, the environment that they live, the animals tend to go forward to the cities, and obviously there are more interaction between animals and humans. Animals have some disease among themselves. These diseases are spread among humans. So if we want to stop disease going forward in the next decades, it's good to stop to eat animals, leave them to live in their own environment. We as non-human, as human animals, we can have our own life. There are nowadays very good alternative for vegan food, and my encouraging is to follow a vegan diet, not drastically, I will say, just going step by step. And yes, obviously you can inform yourself on the websites, different places. There are books about that, alternatives, and so on. If you have any question, you can ask in the channel. Although I am not an expert, I try to learn every day and watch different documentaries, reading books, listen to people who are really smart about the vegan movement and so on. And as much as I can, I join animal rebellion, extinction rebellion movements in order to raise my concern and my awareness about that. So I will finish the episode here. In the last one, I will finish with some tips to walk the vegan path, and also some aspect about the vegans over the world. And I will speak a bit about Veganuary, which is this charity in the UK which is promoting this current of becoming vegan on January as a kind of proposal for New Year. So yeah, I will speak about that in the next one.